Hey and welcome. So in this video I'm going to talk about the Nike billboard which appeared before the Boston Marathon 2026 with the slogan "Runners welcome, walkers tolerated." And I want to talk about why I think it's an example of how we can see marketing practices as a form of embedded and invisible harm, and ultimately how this wasn't just a one-off mistake that Nike made. So the billboard from Nike, which went up in Boston, appeared on the internet not long after it arrived, and it caused absolute outrage. And the reason why there was so much outrage is because the statement played directly into the debates we see so often around running elitism online, particularly for races like Boston, where it's incredibly difficult to get a space. Anybody who's a marathon runner knows of Boston qualifying, and there's this narrative that some people are more deserving of spaces than others. However, the social media community, in response to seeing the images of the Nike billboard, went off. It was loads and loads of outrage, huge amounts of sharing in response to the Nike billboard and why it was a problem. And it was allegedly suggested that Nike were forced to remove it. Now, it's the forced to remove a bit which I have question marks over. Of course, we saw brands taking advantage of Nike being in trouble with the public and sharing multiple inclusive posts off the back of this. We saw running content creators posting kind of rebukes and responses, calling out Nike and highlighting how walking isn't something which is just tolerated in races. In many cases, it's an essential part of the strategy. The goal of this video is not to get into the ins and outs of walking or running paces or even what counts as running. I'm not interested in that. I'm not a running coach. That debate is out of my lane. What I want to do here is to focus on this as an example of a marketing take that appears from the outrage to have gone wrong or to be a failure. But instead, I want to outline an argument for how we could flip this understanding and actually see it or question whether it was an intentional strategy from Nike that went exactly as planned. And actually, I'm going to argue one step further. We could consider whether Nike's practices are actually a form of embedded and invisible social harm. So before we get into any of that, the first thing I want to kind of make a point of is that in terms of getting our attention, that slogan worked. Here we are, me included, talking about it. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the old anecdote, all publicity is good publicity. However, in the world of viral responses and internet pile-ons where there's calls to cancel somebody or a brand who has done something which is seemingly controversial, we need to respond to it. We need to be seen to respond to it. Or for some people, it's just an opportunity to get involved in a bit of internet keyboard warrior trolling. That's something which criminologists are interested in otherwise. It's something we can look at another time. But as a criminologist who's interested in social harm and particularly hidden and invisible forms of harm, a criminologist who's also a runner and who walked and ran at London last year for a number of reasons. But I certainly, and also as an ultra runner, walking is an important part of strategy and races for me. I want to set that stuff aside for now. I want to take forward the point that simplifying things to an understanding where we just say, all publicity is good publicity is a bit of a miss, and we can think about this a bit more carefully. When I first saw responses to Nike's billboard and people kind of being really shocked and surprised about what Nike said and kind of really calling question on it, I actually felt a bit not surprised. And I was like, I can remember stuff like this before when I've seen social media outrage, and I'm pretty sure Nike was at the centre of that controversy. So I kind of went back and had a look at some of this stuff. And of course, I was right in my thinking. It was Nike who was involved in the After Dark events. So events which were pitched about inclusivity. So the LA marathon and half marathon, in 2025 was pitched about being inclusive, and the After Dark tour was all about inclusivity in running. But what Nike did was very near to the actual race day, they reduced the cutoff time. Now, reducing the cutoff time has an impact for people who are back of the pack runners, people who might perhaps be doing their half marathon for their first time. We know from looking at kind of research on races, women are less likely to sign up to a race with a stricter cutoff time. So there's definitely issues around inclusivity. In the end, Nike backtracked on that, but again, it was only because there was this backlash about it. But also, particularly problematic with the After Dark tour was the Reclaim the Night race in London, which was partly in response to the kind of ongoing trends around women's safety in running. And it was pitched as this kind of like women's event for women to feel safe, reclaim the night. And yet there was men on the start line, which again caused lots of kind of feelings of distrust and feelings of being used a bit by Nike in response to that. I then kind of continued digging around into Nike because I also was thinking right back to my early PhD days, and we're talking like over 20 years ago now, where I was researching the fashion industry and related issues around counterfeiting and harm. And I just remembered Nike being a brand which was mentioned a lot when I asked consumers about harm. I also found lots of kind of claims about how Nike used to have a bad reputation for being involved in sweatshop labour and worker exploitation. Back to thinking about marketing campaigns specifically, there was the 2024 marketing campaign which received similar backlash, winning isn't for everyone. Again, kind of for a brand which is saying it's about inclusion and social justice, there's these clear ideals around exclusion within that. These examples are a difficult position for Nike when they're claiming social justice. I mean, social justice is another term which is wildly misused, but that's for another day. But how do we explain how Nike keep getting away with these controversies? Are they just lucky? Is it because they're responding quickly to consumer concern? Actually, this is part of their marketing strategy. And to explore these questions, I want to introduce a series of useful concepts that I've drawn academic literature from through the example of that runners welcome, walkers tolerated billboard. And I'm going to explain what they are, and I'm going to talk about how we can use these different concepts together to develop this argument that Nike actually, their marketing strategy is an invisible form of social harm. Now, the first concept I want to introduce is commodity activism. And that comes from Bannett, Wisner and Mukherjee in 2012. And I'm sorry if I've got their names wrong. Pronunciation is never my strong point. But what they use is this term commodity activism, which to frame activist or social justice type campaigns within an understanding of consumerism. And it's this understanding of consumerism which is really important when we're talking about brands and sponsored events and athletes, and particularly the context of running today. What this means is we can trace how brands such as Nike position themselves as being concerned about social justice, inclusion, and so on. They get us to buy into that. We buy into their brand, we sign up to these events, we want to be part of that as consumers. And the After Dark series is a really great example of this. Nike recognised the trending concern around women's safety and women in particular feeling unsafe running after dark. The idea of an event of reclaiming the night is something they sold to us, they pitched to us, and of course people were like, yeah, that's great, I want to buy into that, I'll sign up to that, I'll take part of that. This is a really clever way that Nike can mass market trust to the public, which of course is fundamental to Nike's profit model, because they want to sell us everyday products and they want us all to buy into their brand. But as we can see by their runners welcome, walkers tolerated and winning's not for everyone slogan, Nike also recognises that their mass market consumer is not the same as their elite consumer. And so whilst Nike recognises that inclusivity is an important part, certainly being seen to be inclusive, they also know that the elite market demands a level of exclusivity. Therefore, whatever Nike does in its branding and marketing, they can't forget that as well as pitching themselves as inclusive to the mass field, they need to pitch themselves as exclusive or different to the elite field if they want to keep that market. The next concept I'm going to introduce is woke washing, and this comes from a paper by Sabande 2019, who used woke washing as a way to describe how brands, including Nike in Sabandi's research, will tap into particular social concerns, which suggests they're contributing towards tackling social justice issues whilst actually reinforcing our commitment to buy and to consume without actually doing anything to change these issues or to challenge these issues. So we can also link this to the idea of a performance paradox, a term that actually we can find in some older marketing theories, which can be used to describe how brands use an issue the public cares about to sell products or services or events, but don't actually deliver in the same way us as the consumer buys into. Because if they actually delivered on the promise, it's likely to affect their brand performance. We can see the performance paradox both in the lie of the marketing, which Nike uses, but also the lie within the sport itself. Nike needs to perform inclusion to gain the mass market, show the potential in all of us. It wants us to think about how we can get better and use their products to achieve more than we ever think capable. And for many of us, that's why we're into running, or why we will do an event or sign up, or whether it's a 5K, a half marathon, a marathon. It's something which feels beyond our reach, beyond our ability, and we want to do it, whether that's through walking or running or whatever. But Nike at the same time needs products which will shape the idea that somebody can win something. So you've got those of us who will take part in a race who know we're never going to be the winners, it's a win for ourselves. But we've also got elite people who are there to win the race, there to get the contracts. The more Nike sells us this idea of inclusivity, the more it paradoxically reinforces the exact opposite. For example, you might feel if you wear Nike trainers or a Nike running kit and then saw the same brand post a sign saying you're only going to be tolerated, you might feel a little bit like, And at the same time, you're seeing sponsored athletes wearing Nike kit and winning the race in their new Alpha Flies. Or thinking about this sign and how kind of there's these two things happening, as I started to kind of think about this post in a little bit more detail, literally a matter of days after we saw the controversy around the signs from Boston Marathon, the Nike store in London in the run up to London Marathon was advertising for people to come into free and to make their own sign. Signs, of course, whilst the person making the sign can put whatever they want on it, it's all made in the same red and black style with a swoosh, clearly linked to Nike's branding. And we can also think about the expectations women might have had when they signed up for the After Dark Reclaim the Event Women's Safety event, and then on the start line they turned up and there was men there, and after the race Nike really backtracked on it being about a women's race and women's sport. Imagine if you were somebody who only participated in that race because you thought it was going to be women's only, and how disappointed and let down you would feel. It's with this recognition and thinking about these examples that I think this case study around Nike is particularly interesting, and why I'm actually fully convinced Nike expected and relied on the backlash and outrage to that sign in the same way they did for the Winning's Not For Everyone campaign. The next term I want to introduce is strategic provocation. Now that's a term I'm using which draws on some kind of ideas within advertising and marketing literature and recognises how negative hooks are an important tool. And negative hooks are a really important tool in terms of social media marketing. Anyone who's ever done any posts on social media will probably be mindful that if you phrase something with a negative hook in it, it's more likely to have engagement than something which doesn't. Negativity provokes strong reactions. Think about this within the context of social media algorithms, which is what's driving brands and influencers when it comes to kind of trying to go viral or selling products and services. The more negative or more provoking it is, the more likely it is to take off. In that way, we could say that Nike knew exactly what they were doing when they had this provocative runners welcome, walkers tolerated billboard. The debates around running elitism existed well before this slogan came along. One of the fiercest places we see this debate is within social media comments around who deserves a space in highly sought after races, especially world majors. Everyone who spends time in these running kind of community spaces will for sure have seen negative comments or responses to negative comments about charity runners in these big races, about slower runners, and now increasingly influencers getting bibs gifted. The elitist argument is that only fast runners deserve these spaces. I've worked so hard for this because my time is 2:59. I deserve this space more than so-and-so who's running it for charity, who'll take 6 hours. I can't actually think of any examples where I've actually seen an elite athlete say that. It tends to be the kind of sub-elite or people trying to position themselves as in that kind of I'm better than you field who say this, but that's another point. But Nike don't just sell to professional athletes. In fact, many of the professional athletes which wear Nike will be sponsored by Nike and will be getting all of their kit for free. Nike wants to tap into that sub-elite market. The people who see themselves as having the potential to be elite, the people who are aiming to get that brand sponsorship, the people who are super fast and think that they can do better, and they're kind of almost up there with that kind of pro level running. Look at carbon trainers. That is a target market. That's hugely beneficial market for Nike to target. Nike aren't going to get that market if they position themselves as being slow and comfortable and inclusive. Their exclusivity is what sells to that market. In response to the billboard, I can imagine for every person who got mad about that billboard and how it wasn't inclusive, there was another person who perhaps quietly agreed with it. But regardless, the global response to the initial billboard on social media far outweighed the reach of it on a shopfront in Boston. It has placed Nike at the centre of every discussion about running at a key point in marathon season. The next concept I want to introduce is symbolic violence. Now, this is a way we can understand the impact of these arguments which I'm outlining about Nike's marketing campaign. Symbolism refers to a kind of violence that it's not felt in the same way as like a physical act of violence, but it has one that perhaps has more sustained effects over time. Kind of violence that's slow, it's much more invisible. You can't see it like a physical broken bone or bruise, which we would get from a physically violent event. So we're using the word violent in a symbolic way. It's a term we can use to understand how those who are only tolerated are made to feel excluded and like they're less welcome than in the space, or somehow less important. And for me, this is really important when we think about this issue from a social harms perspective. The longer term consequences of this kind of symbolic violence or this kind of language which makes people feel excluded or somehow less welcome or less able is actually it can reinforce the societal power hierarchies which we have, and these discriminate against certain groups. Years and years and years of academic research on social inequalities would highlight that this is likely to heavily impact on those already facing the most discrimination and exclusion, not just in running, but in society more generally. For example, in running, we've seen a huge growth in women participating, particularly in longer events such as the marathon. Still a long way to go before these kind of divides we see in terms of social demographics and characteristics in terms of society, but also we see it within running, are exacerbated much further when we intersect something like gender with other issues around inclusion. So particularly if we think about in relation to ethnicity or race or disability, for example, not to mention socioeconomic factors that may exclude many from being able to afford to participate. It's quite expensive to participate in these big running events. So the significant danger of this kind of symbolic violence, which reinforces these social hierarchies and divisions and reinforces ideas around exclusion, is it serves to reinforce these inequalities and divisions. Whilst in the context of commodified running, within the consumer capitalist society which we're living within, it allows a veneer of performative inclusivity and performative social justice. But how does language such as walk as tolerated land for the many perhaps charity runners who might be more likely to use a walk-run strategy because they might not be, they might just be an occasional runner. It might be a huge thing for this person to be doing. So how does that person feel? Not to mention, how does this kind of elitism land for an adaptive athlete? My final point then, where I want to get to, is remembering that first of all, Nike is currently the leading global sportswear brand with a net income of $3.2 billion US, and that stat is from Statista in 2025. Nike's slogan, "Just Do It," is probably one of the best known brand taglines we have. Given their history of marketing campaigns and some of the issues which we've just started to unpick within this video, you could suggest what they actually mean is just do better. For most runners, whether we're talking about elite runners or whether we're talking about occasional recreational runners, there's often an important element of improvement driving the goal, whether that's to get your personal best or whether it's just to complete something you didn't think you could do. Nike want us to buy into this idea of improvement through us using their products, whether that's for being able to do it or whether feeling like we look the part. However, Nike also knows that the elite market, the growing mass sub-elite or improver market, the people who are really focused on getting the super fast times, and the occasional runner are all very different markets who have different priorities. Carbon plated trainers are a really great example here. Their designs take a couple of minutes off time for faster runners by designing a shoe which works best at a faster pace. They're not going to help the 5 or 6 hour runners because they're designed for people who want to, get from 2:30 to 2:28, for example. Nike don't want to be seen as the comfort provider for the average. They want to be seen as the brand who wins and who is the fastest, because they want that elite market. They want to be seen as the leading sportswear brand. Therefore, we can say that theories around commodity activism and also corporate social responsibility, so making it seem like you're engaging with the issues which public are concerned about, is very important, particularly in the days of social media, that brands or people who represent brands are seen to respond to issues which the public are concerned about. So they have to engage with this level of conversation around inclusivity and social justice. These theories around commodity activism and corporate social responsibility highlight, when it comes to brands, performative inclusion is likely to actually just be another profit strategy. So here's Criminology, which is the study of social harms, which I've talked about in some of my other videos from the Curious Criminologist, so essentially we're talking about the study of social harm. So not just thinking about things which are criminal, but things which are harmful and why that might be. These ideas can help us explain and to understand how controversial and how performative marketing strategies are ones which actually have entirely predictable social harms. So the question I want to leave you with is Nike intentionally fragmenting and reinforcing the elitism in running communities to maximise its own performance? I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the Nike billboard, and it's helped you think a little bit more about why did we feel rage, but also were we supposed to feel rage as part of the strategy to market Nike as a brand? Anyway, would love to know your thoughts and comments. And of course, if you've got any questions about any of this, let me know. Appreciate it's some difficult ideas, but essentially, I hope you can see that by getting really outraged about it, I'm absolutely convinced we did exactly what Nike wanted us to do in terms of getting us all talking about Nike as a brand in relation to marathons.